Hi everyone, my name is Parth and I'm back with another video tutorial. This video will brief the user about authentication and authorization in ASP.NET. So let's begin. So we would be covering the following topics in this video tutorial. We'll start with the introduction. We'll see why security is important in today's world of cybercrime. And what are the different ways to which we can use to secure our applications or websites. Then we'll see what is an IIS and how does it work. Then we'll understand the meaning of authentication and authorization. We'll see the concept of identity object and principal object. And then basically we'll see different ways of authentication, which are forms, windows, and passport authentication. So let's begin. Why security is important. Security, if you see nowadays, it's one of the most, or you can say very important part of when you're designing a website or a web application. Because if you don't have security, there are people around you who can get into your website, who can basically try to hack. And those people are known as hackers. So they are waiting to find any glitch or any inconsistency in our application in terms of security, and they will try to exploit it. So an hacker can exploit an application or a website in different ways. Okay, he can use a brute force concept, that's the algorithm. He can use sniffers. He can use spoofing. He can also use social engineering techniques. Like you might have seen people basically hacking some user profiles in Facebook or Instagram. And the last one is SQL injection. So SQL injection basically means trying to write a query in SQL, which is basically injecting some kind of anomalies or breaches your data in your website. So let's see a very common example of hacking. So let's say we have a user. User is trying to transfer a money from, let's say, his account to some other person accounts. So what happened in between, the hacker, if that network or that systems are not secured, the hacker will try to intercept the user network. He will create a disturbance in the network in that particular transaction of amount from one account to another, and he will start using any hacking technique which he knows, and it transfers to money to his own account. So this is a very common type of example we see nowadays, which hackers use. Let's say different ways which we can use to secure our application. So there are some bullet points. So first is design your application well. So the design of our application should be such that it's secured. Like it should not, like you should not expose your business logic or code to the external users. It should be a separate layer. You should only expose the UI to the end user. You should always, while storing the data in your database, you should always encrypt it and then you decrypt it when you are getting the data back from the database. You should always apply some input validations so that there's a minimum chance of SQL injection. So input validation helps in ignoring the SQL injection. You should always try to enforce strong password policies for your users in your website or application. And you should always implement authentication and authorization in your application. So let's see what is an IIS and how does it work. So IIS basically stands for Internet Information Systems or Internet Information Services. So IIS is basically one of the most powerful web server which is developed by Microsoft to host .NET, or you can say MVC, or nowadays .NET Core applications or websites on it. So its responsibility is to give us back a response when a client sends a request to it. So how does it work is, you can see on the right side diagram, there's a client who is sending a request. Okay. So request goes to the IIS. Now in the IIS we have worker processes, or you can say ASP.NET processes. It basically sends this request to .NET processes. A .NET process basically sends back the response to IIS, and then it further sends it back to the client machine. What is authentication? The English, or you can say the dictionary meaning of authentication, is to check someone's genuineness, like whether the person is genuine or not. So in ASP.NET, authentication means the same. Like you can say it is a process where you check a person's credibility, the credentials, the username and password. So you might have seen when you create a Facebook account or a Yahoo or Gmail or any other account, and when you try to log in, it will ask you the username and password. So those usernames and passwords are basically the users or person's credentials. What is authorization? So authorization is a second step which comes after authentication. Here we basically give access to a user based on their roles. Okay. So you can see in the right hand side, there's an example. User is first trying to log into a web application. So user writes his login username and password. Okay. And if these are incorrect, you'll get back a error message that you are not authenticated user. If the credentials are correct, then it will check the role of the user, whether this person here, let's say its name is Shivanand. So whether this person is a normal user or is an administrator. So if this person is administrator, he will redirect to the admin page. Otherwise, if it's normal user, the application will redirect him to a normal user page. We have a concept of identity object and principal object. So let's understand that. An identity object is nothing but it's an object in .NET which stores information about an authenticated user. Okay. Like let's say on the right hand side, you can see example. So uh, an entity object basically stores the information about authenticated user. Like you can say name, authentication type, and whether the user is authenticated or not. And it contains two types of objects, Windows identity and generic identity. Next, we have a concept of principal object. So principal object, basically you can say it's an object that basically defines the roles which are given to that particular authenticated user. And this principal object basically acts as a wrapper, or it encapsulates the identity object inside it, right? Which you can see on the diagram on your right. Now there are different ways of authentication. So basically there are three ways: form, window, and passport. So let's discuss first the form authentication. Form authentication is nothing but it's a type of authentication based on a cookies, where cookies get stored on the client's machine. It basically creates a custom form to accept users' credentials, like let's say username and password. Then those credentials are validated with the information stored in a specific source. It can be a database also, or any other kind of source, of maybe a blob file. The advantage of using form authentication is that it's the simplest way of authentication users, very simplest way. And also user does not have to log in again and again for the same application, because that information is already stored in a specific format in a specific source. So, and since it uses cookies, so it will take the user credentials from the cookies the next time same user tries to access the same application. So here you can see an example. We have a username. So user with the name Shivanand and password ShiftPass. So user credentials are first validated to a source, like it can be a config file as told, or a database. If they are incorrect credentials, an error message is shown. If they are valid credentials, they are stored in a cookies on the client machines. Okay. Then basically a hash function is used to encrypt these two information, basically which is a authentication ticket. And then a user is allowed to use that application or access that applications portal. Next is window authentication. So Windows authentication is basically used for intranet applications, which means in a internal network. So user credentials are basically validated with the information they provide, which is stored in the Windows users group. And Windows authentication is not available in Windows 7 version of Home, or it can be premium, basic, and starter versions. So Windows authentication is not available in those versions. Now there are different types of Windows authentication also: anonymous, basic, digest, and integrated Windows authentication. So anonymous means that it will not authenticate the user on the credentials. Basic means that user is authenticated and information is sent back in a base64 encoded format. Digest authentication, it's similar to basic authentication except that information is sent in an encrypted format. And the last is integrated Windows authentication. Basically, this type of authentication uses either NTLM or Kerberos type for Windows authentication. Last type of authentication is passport authentication. So for passport authentications, user credentials are authenticated using the Microsoft websites. You can say Windows Live or Hotmail or Outlook. Then these users are sent to the Microsoft's login page for authentication, where they are authenticated only, not authorized. The developer here does not require to create his own custom login form because it uses the Microsoft's login page. And for using the passport authentication service in your application, you will have to download the .NET Passport SDK, and you also have to register your application using the .NET Service Manager. So that's all about authentication and authorization in ASP.NET. I hope you might have gathered some information about how authentication and authorization is implemented in .NET. So I will see you in some another video very soon. Thank you.